Trump is building an addition to the White House, a ballroom, a grand ballroom. Like everything else about Trump, it looks like it's going to be big and tacky and empty. I have thoughts. The first thing that jumps out when I look at the various mock-ups that have been made available of what this thing is supposed to look like when it's done is how ridiculously sized it is compared to the existing White House. Look at that. If you didn't know any better, you'd assume the White House is the addition being built onto the ballroom, not the other way around. It's absurdly out of proportion with the rest of the building. I don't claim to be an expert on ballrooms. I've never lived in a house that had its own on-site ballroom. I'm not sure I could sleep at night if I did, but are ballrooms usually larger than every other part of the house combined? I don't know. Something about that just seems wrong. Let's be honest about what this actually is. He calls it a ballroom. It's not a ballroom. Look at the size of it. Look at the style of it, outside and inside, according to these illustrations. Look at all the windows. It's not a ballroom. It's a palace. It's Trump's Versailles. What eventually happened to the people who lived at Versailles, by the way? That's a rhetorical question. You probably know. Trump doesn't know. He barely ever even starts a book, never mind getting to the end of one. He's an unrestrained id. He knows what he likes, he knows what he wants, and that's it. I don't think he's ever actually been to the Palace of Versailles. Its status as a historical landmark probably puts him off. He has a generalized fear of learning something, anything. But I assume he's seen photographs of it and thought, ooh, pretty, want, and that was the end of his thoughts on the matter. Still, Trump seems to have an intuitive understanding of what makes the Palace of Versailles so morally repulsive to so many of us. In a way, the building of this ballroom and the timing of it commencing during a government shutdown is just the latest in a series of let them eat cake moments. While millions of Americans worry that they're about to lose the subsidies that make their health coverage affordable or be cut off from federally funded aid programs that they need to put food on their tables, Trump is expanding the executive mansion so that he and his rich buddies have a fancier place to party. But Trump doesn't see it as repulsive. The very things about it that offend most of us are what attract him to the idea. Let them eat cake? Sure, why not? Who doesn't like cake? Of course, Trump's Versailles won't be as opulent and grand as the real thing because Trump himself is not a person of Baroque taste. He's a person with no taste. For evidence of this, just look at what he's done to the Oval Office since he resumed occupancy. That's a lot of gold. If I had to guess, I'd say that's a lot of gold-looking stuff, actually. I'm sure some of it is very expensive, but I'm equally sure some of it isn't. Going back to Trump's shallow and highly selective understanding of history for a moment, he's almost like a living, breathing embodiment of the Gilded Age, isn't he? That's what his Oval Office redecoration reminds me of. That's also what comes to mind when I look at the plans for his ballroom, the Gilded Age. So called because it was proclaimed by some at the time to be a golden age, an age of rebirth following the death and destruction of the Civil War. Only it turned out not so much. The gold was but a thin top layer that covered what was underneath. Most Americans continued to struggle socially and economically, and only the wealthy thought that things were actually going well. Gee, doesn't that sound familiar? Hey, doesn't Trump like to brag that this is a new golden age for America? Do you think Trump would draw any distinction at all between a gilded age and a true golden age? Like, if someone told him, you keep saying this is a golden age for America, but to a lot of people it's more like another gilded age, would he even understand what they were trying to say? If it looks like gold, it's gold. What's the difference? Shut up and enjoy the beautiful gold. That sounds like his attitude. Lots of people are talking about the ballroom now because last week, after months of Trump talking about it, construction began. Workers with heavy machinery demolished the east wing of the White House. This pissed people off for several reasons. One reason is, in the past, when he's talked about building his ballroom, Trump has insisted that the existing structure of the White House wouldn't be touched. He described the ballroom as a separate structure, standing alongside the White House. Now, it turns out, that wasn't true. Why would Trump choose to lie about that? I don't know. Why does he choose to lie about most of the stuff he lies about? Some of the times when he lies, it's for understandable reasons. Not good reasons, but understandable ones. He's lying to cover his ass. He's lying to try and get away with one of his many crimes. He's lying to take credit for something he had nothing to do with. But why lie about not touching the existing White House? Maybe he did it so he wouldn't have to listen to people complaining about it for a few more months. Or maybe he did it because that's what he does. He lies. Fish swim, birds fly, snakes slither, and Donald Trump lies. Another reason people have been upset to see the East Wing torn down in preparation for Trump's ballroom is because it seems like Trump shouldn't have the authority to just do that. The White House is not his house. He just lives there while he's the president. And as it happens, Trump doesn't have the authority to just do that. He needs the approval of the National Capital Planning Commission, which is kind of like a combination of a historical society and a neighborhood association that has the power to review proposed new construction in Washington, D.C., to maintain the existing character of the city and ensure any changes or additions will enhance that character rather than detract from it. Trump doesn't care about any of that. In response to the public outcry over the project, Trump's administration released a statement insisting, with a typically sneering and entitled tone, that Trump's ballroom is just the latest in a long line of changes and additions to the White House made by presidents throughout history. Among the changes cited in the statement are Teddy Roosevelt building the West Wing, Woodrow Wilson adding the Rose Garden, Franklin Roosevelt building the East Wing, enlarging the West Wing and moving the Oval Office to its current location, John Kennedy overseeing the redesign of the Rose Garden, Richard Nixon building a bowling alley, Barack Obama building a basketball court and adding a garden on the South Lawn, which, okay, good point. Many past presidents have changed the White House, added things, changed things around to suit their needs or to make what they felt were necessary improvements, but it was all done thoughtfully, with a sense of history and responsibility, and a desire to maintain the essential nature and dignity of the property. Where's the dignity in this monstrosity? Just the other day, Carol Quillen, president of the National Trust for Historic Preservation, sent a letter to the National Capital Planning Commission and the National Park Service about Trump's ballroom project. The letter reads, in part, quote, "We respectfully urge the administration and the National Park Service to pause demolition until plans for the proposed ballroom go through the legally required public review processes, including consultation and review by the National Capital Planning Commission and the Commission of Fine Arts, and to invite comment from the public. These processes provide a crucial opportunity for transparency and broad engagement, values that have guided preservation of the White House under every administration, going back to the public competition in 1792 that produced the building's original design. Doing so will help ensure that the project both honors the exceptional historic significance of the White House and acknowledges the investment that the American people have in the preservation of this beloved place." Sure, it has the impotent ring of a strongly worded letter, and it will probably make no difference whatsoever, but it does highlight the important role the National Capital Planning Commission is supposed to play in any renovation or expansion of the White House. Hey, I wonder what the members of the National Capital Planning Commission think about Trump ignoring them and taking a bulldozer to the East Wing without even asking. Let's see if there's anything on their website. Whoops! Oh, wow, President Trump is demolishing part of the White House to build his vanity project when the federal agency in charge of deciding whether or not he's allowed to do that is closed due to the government shutdown that he and his party are responsible for? How perfectly in character. Nothing remotely surprising about that whatsoever. The only thing that surprises me about it is that it took Trump until nearly 3 weeks into the shutdown before he called in the contractors. Did he think having them start on day one would have been too shady even for him? Or did he just forget about it until now? There's a third reason I've noticed for why people are upset at seeing Trump demolishing the East Wing. It's because seeing it happen makes it real. This is understandable, but I'm also getting a little sick of people having this reaction whenever Trump does something. This would happen back in Trump's first term as well. Remember when the government shut down then? It was over funding for Trump's border wall. People were like, he shut down the government for that? I can't believe he's actually going to build that wall. Earlier this year, when he pardoned the January 6 insurrectionists, people were like, I can't believe he actually did that. When he started sending ICE after everyone who looked too brown to be here, and deported people without due process, and sent people to a Salvadoran prison, and arrested and deported or tried to deport students who had committed no crime and were clearly being targeted for their political views. I can't believe he's actually doing that. When he expelled trans people from the military, when he imposed tariffs on the whole world, when he stood beside RFK Jr. as he gutted American public health institutions and publicly blamed Tylenol for autism, when he sent National Guard troops into cities for no reason other than to try and intimidate people into submission, when he openly ordered his Attorney General to begin investigating and prosecuting his personal enemies, when he shared an AI-generated video of himself as a fighter pilot dropping a payload of shit on protesters, when he ordered the demolition of the East Wing to begin construction of his ballroom. I can't believe this is actually happening. How much longer does it have to go on before you start to believe it? I'm glad it still doesn't seem normal to a lot of you. It shouldn't, it mustn't, but it's still happening. And you continuing to stare at it in slack-jawed disbelief like a wrestler who just had somebody kick out of their finishing move isn't helping. What Trump is doing to the White House is familiar to me because I've seen it happen in my own hometown. I know exactly what he's doing. He's taking the White House megachurch. I'll tell you what I mean. There's a church a few miles outside of Hagerstown on Route 40 between Hagerstown and Clear Spring, the little town where I grew up. It's called Emmanuel Baptist Temple. The church itself is fucking horrid. Backwards, close-minded, fundamentalist Christianity at its worst. A lot of Trump voters in the sanctuary on Sunday morning, I'd guess. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about just the building itself. Thanks to Google Maps, I can show you this image of what Emmanuel Baptist Church looked like about 20 years ago. I'd call that a reasonable size for a church located in a rural area of a county with a total population of around 150,000 people, a county where, despite the relatively low population density, you can piss in a circle from any random location and hit no fewer than 3 churches. Then, a few years after that Google Maps image was taken, Emmanuel Baptist decided their reasonably sized church wasn't good enough. So they started raising money to expand. Today, Emmanuel Baptist looks like this. Notice the difference? The gigantic addition over there to the left that makes the original building look like a boil on God's ass. But of course, God wouldn't have a boil on his ass, would he? God's ass would be perfect. Or at least worn to a smooth, even sheen after millennia of being kissed by people like those who attend Emmanuel Baptist on a semi-weekly basis. The point is, Emmanuel Baptist went megachurch. That's what Trump wants to do with the White House. He wants to go megachurch. Megachurch? MAGA church. Did I just say the same thing 3 times in a row? Donald Trump is old and doesn't have much time left, praise be to God's holy polished ass. And to go along with that, he's insecure and becoming preoccupied with legacy. He's looking back over a lifetime of grifting and mediocrity and asking himself, how will I be remembered? What will I leave behind? That's part of what this ballroom is all about, I think. And in that sense, and only that sense, really, I'm okay with it. If that ballroom is built to the absurd scale and in the lavish yet chintzy style that he wants, and if it is allowed to stand by subsequent presidents, if there are any, future generations will look at it in disbelief and say, Jesus Christ, what happened there? What more fitting legacy could Donald Trump have?